Have you ever watched a quiet rancher outsmart a band of dangerous intruders, all thanks to a trio of highly trained guard dogs? In this thrilling tale, that's exactly what happens. Georgia Geo Walters isn't your average farmer. She's a retired Marine Corps K-9 handler with decades of battle-honed experience. And when shady figures creep onto her beloved Falcon Ridge farm, she deploys Blaze, Scout, and Halo in a heart-stopping showdown that proves brains, courage, and canine teamwork can overcome even the most underhanded tactics. Curious about how it all ends? Stick around to witness every twist and turn of this suspenseful story. By the final scene, you'll be marveling at the power of grit, loyalty, and preparedness in safeguarding what matters most. If you enjoy gripping farm stories with a dash of action, make sure to subscribe to Farmer's Story so you don't miss any future tales. Your support and subscription mean the world to us, and we can't wait to share more unforgettable adventures right here on our channel. Georgia Geo Walters didn't come to Montana's Falcon Ridge farm looking for conflict. She came for peace. After 25 years in the Marine Corps as a K-9 trainer, she imagined a quiet life in northern Montana would be the perfect retirement. With her lean build, silver-streaked hair, and weathered cheeks, Geo looked every bit the unassuming rancher, though there was an unmistakable sharpness in her gaze that hinted at decades spent in high-stakes environments. Her three Belgian Malinois, Blaze, Scout, and Halo, were anything but ordinary farm dogs. They possessed more than 36 tactical operations among them, forging reputations as disciplined, working animals who had faced real danger in distant corners of the world. That morning, which dawned with crisp air and a pale sunrise, Geo slipped on her battered leather boots and ventured out for her usual perimeter walk. The dryness of autumn left golden-brown fields stretching in all directions, with patches of pine forest crowning the nearby foothills. Blaze trotted ahead, watchful and confident, nose tilted upward to catch scents in the breeze. Scout skirted to the right, pausing to sniff the soil as though memorizing every bit of data. Halo hung back slightly, scanning each fence post as though it might hide a lurking threat. The formation they held was the product of countless training hours, both in official military programs and in the farmland drills Geo had devised since her retirement. Approaching the old equipment shed, she caught a faint glimmer of something on the lock. Leaning closer, she saw deep scratch marks around the hasp, as if someone had tried to pry it open. Her lip curled in a silent sign of displeasure. The interior still looked intact. Her vintage John Deere tractor sat quietly in the dim light, and the specialized irrigation pumps for her orchard remained untouched. Yet the evidence was undeniable. Someone had been testing her security. Geo tapped her radio. "Toby, we've had a visitor at the shed," she said, referring to her 19-year-old farmhand, Toby Kim. "Keep your eyes open. Let me know if you see anything unusual." "Yes, ma'am," came Toby's crackling reply. He was new to the ranch life, having grown up in a smaller town nearby, but he'd proven reliable in the months he'd worked under her. Beside her, Blaze let out a low rumble, drawing Geo's attention to footprints in the patchy soil, a set of tracks that didn't match her own or Toby's. She snapped a photo with her phone for future reference. Whoever it was, they weren't exactly amateurs. The footprints showed deliberate movement patterns that suggested they'd avoided the range of her camera feeds. Stepping away from the shed, Geo felt a tug of old instincts. A familiar tension prickled at the back of her neck, the same feeling she used to get right before a nighttime patrol in war-torn regions. She'd chosen Falcon Ridge for its quiet isolation, but it seemed that trouble had arrived at her doorstep. One thing was certain: anyone expecting an easy mark would soon realize they'd stumbled upon the wrong property. Geo Walters had faced men with far more deadly intentions than these trespassers, and she had 3 highly trained Malinois ready to prove it. After confirming the equipment shed was still secure, Geo walked back to the farmhouse, the dogs trotting dutifully at her heels. She entered what looked like a typical mudroom, a cluttered space with worn coats, boots, and an old wooden bench. Behind a second door, however, lay a hidden security hub she'd designed herself. The room was outfitted with multiple monitors, each linked to a network of discrete cameras stationed around her property. There were motion detectors along fence lines, infrared sensors at choke points near the creek, and perimeter alarms near the orchard. It was likely more elaborate than what most ranchers would employ, but Geo believed in preparedness. a habit she'd never shed even after leaving the Marines. She settled into a chair before the main console, running through recorded footage. The early morning hours revealed at least two, possibly three individuals moving near the shed. The images were hazy, moonlight and shadow conspired to keep them half hidden. Yet their behavior marked a certain caution, a deliberate avoidance of open areas. They weren't typical vandals out for a thrill. These silhouettes moved in a fashion that hinted at training, pausing at intervals to watch for watchers. Their presence in the attempted break-in on the shed's lock painted a clear picture of scouting or sabotage. Her phone buzzed on the desk. Toby's number. She tapped to answer, half expecting bad news, but Toby's voice was steady. Gio, I just got a call from Sheriff Morris. He's checking if we had any damage last night. Says there were multiple incidents across the county, broken farm equipment, stolen fuel, a few barns vandalized. Toby paused. He also asked if you'd heard anything about a new resort plan from Langford Development. They're apparently making offers to local farms. Gio frowned. She'd heard rumors about Langford Development sniffing around these parts for months. Word was they wanted to set up an upscale resort, presumably tapping into the region's natural beauty and proximity to hunting grounds. But she hadn't paid it much mind. Her farm wasn't for sale, and she typically ignored real estate speculators. Nonetheless, Toby's call indicated that others had been feeling the squeeze. Thanks, Toby, she replied. Let the sheriff know we're all right for now. She ended the call, heart pounding with quiet anger. Turning to the monitors again, Gio couldn't shake the sense that Langford's people might be behind these nighttime prowlers. She had seen corporations use hired contractors before, sometimes crossing ethical lines if they stood to profit from it. Her neighbor, Harriet Monroe, a retired Army MP with a formidable reputation, had mentioned suspicious trucks passing near the boundary between their properties a week ago. Harriet suspected it was part of a systematic push by unscrupulous developers. Gio had shrugged it off at first, but the evidence was growing. Outside, sunlight flooded the yard, gleaming off the metal rooftops of the barns. Blaze, Scout, and Halo sprawled in the grass, panting contentedly, though every so often one would prick its ears and look toward the tree line. That heightened awareness never truly subsided. Gio leaned in the doorway, arms folded, her mind churning through possible scenarios. If these were indeed mercenary-type operators scouting for Langford or someone similar, then last night was just a test. They'd be back, and likely in greater numbers, or with more destructive intent. She vowed that next time they wouldn't get away with leaving just a few scratches on her property. Late that afternoon, Gio called Harriet to compare notes. Harriet's crisp, no-nonsense voice came through the phone speaker. Footprints along my southern fence line. Gotta be the same group. They were light on their feet, didn't meander like typical trespassers. Harriet explained she'd also noticed fresh tire marks in the soft dirt off the county road, consistent with a vehicle that pulled off, waited, and drove back out. If they're testing multiple properties, they might be scoping out potential sabotage points. Water lines, access roads. That's the usual pattern, Harriet said. Gio nodded to herself. In her Marine days, she had conducted recon missions to gather intel on strategic objectives, often checking infrastructure points like roads or power stations. This mirrored that approach, albeit on a smaller, more local scale. She could picture a group of men, trained though not necessarily elite, hired to pressure local ranchers into selling out. Usually the tactic went, break or damage key equipment, then watch the property owner scramble under financial stress. Eventually, a slick representative from the development company would appear with an easy buyout offer. She thanked Harriet, then stepped onto the farmhouse's porch, letting the last rays of sunlight warm her face. The orchard beyond the yard glowed in golds and browns, the apples already harvested weeks ago. Toby walked up from the barn, holding a dusty folder. Gio, I found some older documents about water rights for Falcon Ridge. Looks like we have priority usage from that main creek for irrigation, dating back to the original homestead deed. Langford's group might want that water source, especially if they're building something big. Gio skimmed the folder's contents. If the rumors were true that Langford wanted a resort with a golf course, spa, and large guest accommodations, the water demand would be massive. Securing water rights might be the key reason for leaning on local farms. She recalled Harriet telling her about farmers a few miles down the valley who'd had their irrigation pumps mysteriously fail. When they couldn't afford the repairs, they took buyouts. It all fit the puzzle. Sabotage, intimidation, offers of easy teacher. As dusk approached, she and Toby busied themselves feeding the livestock, checking fences, and tightening the security system. The farm's main generator got a once-over, ensuring they could rely on backup power if something cut the main line. Blaze, Scout, and Halo stuck close, occasionally wandering off to investigate noises, but returning at the first whistle. Each dog carried themselves with calm confidence, unbothered by the increasing tension that seemed to grip the farm. When the stars emerged in a clear Montana sky, Geo felt a pang of nostalgia for nights spent on base half a world away. Yet she remained focused on the present. She brewed a pot of coffee, preparing for a long vigil. If these prowlers were truly testing her, they might come again tonight. Harriet had offered to position herself along their shared boundary. "Call me if you see anything suspicious," Harriet had said. "I'll do the same." In the near silence of the farmhouse, Geo sat beside her monitoring station, occasionally sipping coffee, while the dogs rested in designated spots. The lights were low, screens glowing in soft greenish hues. This was a far cry from her old overseas deployments, yet the tension felt eerily similar. It was the calm before a potential storm, and Geo was prepared to meet it head-on. Just before midnight, a flicker on one of the screens caught Geo's attention. A motion-activated camera near the north fence showed a faint blur crossing into the orchard. Immediately, she tapped a few keys to bring up the infrared. 4 distinct heat signatures moved slowly between rows of fruit trees. "Harriet," she whispered into her radio, "we've got movement in the orchard. 4 individuals, possibly armed. Can't confirm yet." A quiet crackle and Harriet's equally hushed voice followed. "Copy. I'll circle to the west side, see if there are more." Geo put her headset on and positioned Blaze, Scout, and Halo at the ready. The orchard was roughly 200 yards away from the main house, and she could see faint moonlight glinting off metal, likely tools or possibly firearms. She flicked a switch that powered low-output floodlights, just enough to cast a soft glow over the orchard's fringes, hopefully disorienting the intruders without revealing her own vantage points. Through the camera feed, she watched them freeze in place, scanning the area. One figure stepped forward, swinging a small flashlight in erratic arcs. "Stay calm," came a faint voice on the wind. "We just need to break a few lines, make it look like an accident. Langford's man said they use drip irrigation here. We bust that up, we're done." Geo swallowed hard. So it was sabotage, just as she suspected. She watched them shift into a more spread-out formation, each person taking a separate row of trees. A classic infiltration tactic taught in many military or security outfits. Never bunch up as a single target. Geo gave a short whistle, then signaled Blaze to head out. The Malinois slipped into the darkness with barely a sound. Scout followed, skirting toward the orchard's opposite flank. Halo stood by Geo's side, awaiting commands. They had practiced this maneuver plenty of times. Each dog would herd the intruders toward a central choke point. If the intruders tried to scatter, Harriet or Geo could cut them off. They aimed to intimidate or capture without lethal force if possible. Within minutes, Blaze's presence was known. The watchers on Geo's monitor saw one intruder whirl around, shouting an expletive. The camera's audio barely picked it up. "Dog! There's a dog!" Before he could finish, the second intruder yelled, "Get back! Don't shoot unless we have to." That caution confirmed they wanted sabotage, not a gunfight. But a cornered person with a weapon could still be lethal, so Geo remained vigilant. Harriet's voice crackled in next. "Got too near the creek, might be trying to outflank us. I'm heading that way." From experience, Geo trusted Harriet's ability to handle a small group on her own. Meanwhile, she left the house with Halo, moving low across open ground. She settled behind a large oak at the edge of the orchard, scanning with her rifle scope. In the dim, watery moonlight, she could see at least one intruder trying to tamper with a line of irrigation tubing. "Stop right there," she called out, voice carrying a calm authority. "Put your hands where I can see them." The figure froze, seeming torn between fight or flight. That standoff lasted mere seconds before a second intruder came rushing over, brandishing a length of pipe as a makeshift weapon. Geo tensed, ready to command Halo forward, but Blaze got there first. The dog dashed between rows of trees, letting out a fierce bark that forced the pipe-wielding man to stumble. He nearly dropped his improvised weapon as Blaze circled, growling menacingly. The other saboteur, still crouched near the irrigation line, tried to scuttle backward, but Scout emerged from the darkness, blocking his retreat. Faced with two large, disciplined Malinois, the men froze. "Who the hell are you?" one demanded shakily. "This is just some farmland. You can't sick dogs on us like that." Geo stepped closer, rifle held in a stable grip. "I can, and I have," she replied. "You're trespassing with the intent to destroy property, and you're armed. Consider yourselves lucky these dogs haven't done worse." She whistled a command, and Blaze halted his advance, though he continued to snarl close enough for the intruder to see rows of sharp teeth. Meanwhile, Harriet radioed in an update. "Too near the creek are running. I'm driving them toward the county road. Should I let them go?" Geo exhaled. "Affirmative. As long as they're off my property, that's enough for tonight. We'll call the sheriff in the morning." Harriet acknowledged, and the soft pop of static ended the exchange. Turning her attention back to the orchard, Geo narrowed her eyes at the men. "You're not from around here. Who sent you?" A flicker of hesitation crossed the face of the one near Scout. He shot a quick glance at his partner as though weighing whether to speak. The other man muttered under his breath, "Langford said it'd be an easy job," and then clammed up, realizing too late he'd named his employer. Geo let the name hang in the air. "I see," she said, voice flat. "So you're the muscle Langford hired to force me into giving up this land." The men didn't respond, but their expressions said everything. Geo could have tried to detain them, but it was dark, they were armed, and Harriet's chase might already be attracting attention. Instead, she settled for a warning. "Leave," she said, stepping aside and letting Halo fill the gap. "Tell Langford that I'm not interested in his scare tactics, and spread the word. I've spent my career training dogs for far more dangerous work than you can imagine." Blaze let out another low growl, encouraging the men to move. They backed away, stepping gingerly as though the orchard might explode beneath their feet. She watched until they were well beyond the fence, scurrying off in the same direction Harriet had driven the other pair. Then she sent Toby a quick text, telling him to remain inside and lock the doors, just in case. Her adrenaline was high, but her mind was calm. She was used to dealing with threats in a methodical fashion. If these men were any indication, the intimidation game had escalated to direct sabotage. Standing among the silent rows of apple trees under a moonlit sky, Geo felt more certain than ever that she'd have to fight with everything she had to protect Falcon Ridge from being swallowed by greed and fear. The next morning, Sheriff Oliver Morris drove up to Falcon Ridge Farm, dust pluming behind his aged SUV. A tall, wiry man in his early 50s, Morris had served the county for nearly 2 decades. He stepped out, adjusting his badge, and greeted Geo with a firm handshake. Behind him, Harriet stood with arms crossed, having arrived moments earlier. Together, they formed an impromptu council to discuss the previous night's events. Geo led them inside the farmhouse, offering coffee before ushering them into her hidden security room. Flicking on the screens, she played back footage of the orchard confrontation. Although dim, the recordings left no doubt. 4 individuals, each taking clear, deliberate actions to damage irrigation systems, only to be met by the dog's intervention. Sheriff Morris grimaced. "I recognize one of those faces," he admitted. "Joey Barnes, small-time enforcer for hire. Never pinned anything big on him, but he's been linked to shady private security gigs." He exhaled heavily. "Langford again, eh? We've had half a dozen complaints from around the county about sabotage and underhanded tactics, but no solid proof." Harriet shrugged. "Looks like you have the proof now." She tapped the screen. Geo's security cameras caught them red-handed. "You can take stills and show them around." Morris rubbed a hand across his jaw. "I'll do that, but the county commissioner is chummy with Langford. If I try to press charges, there's a chance it'll get buried. We might need to go above the county level if we want results. State or federal even." They discussed the wave of intimidation. Harriet mentioned she'd heard from a friend in the next county that a few ranchers had suddenly sold their properties after repeated accidents. Morris nodded. "I can connect you with a state investigator I know. Maybe that'll push the envelope." Still, none of them were naive about the slow grind of legal bureaucracy, especially when the suspect had deep pockets and political ties. By midday, Morris departed to file his report, taking copies of Gio's footage. Harriet stayed for lunch, which Toby helped prepare. As they sat around the kitchen table, fresh eggs, biscuits, and ham sizzling on plates, Gio noticed Toby's furrowed brow. "What's on your mind?" she asked. Toby hesitated. "I went to pick up supplies earlier, and the local feed store refused to fulfill my usual order. Said they were on a new contract with a bigger client." Harriet scowled. "That's how it starts. Langford's group probably convinced them to deprioritize small farms. They want to choke off your operations." Toby grimaced, fiddling with his fork. "We can try other stores, but they're further away and more expensive." Gio set down her coffee mug with a deliberate thud. "Let them try to squeeze us," she said quietly. "We'll adapt." Beneath the table, Blaze stretched out, ears pricked at the shift in her tone. Harriet reached out and patted the dog's head. "You're not alone, Xiaoro," she added. "We'll keep watch. The next time these hired hands come around, we'll be ready." Gio nodded her thanks, feeling a surge of determination. If she had spent years defending U.S. assets from insurgent threats abroad, she could certainly defend her land from unscrupulous developers at home. Within the next week, tensions escalated further. Harriet reported seeing unmarked trucks rolling down the gravel roads at odd hours. Sheriff Morris relayed that every complaint he filed seemed to stall. Toby learned from a friend working at the local diner that strangers had been asking about Falcon Ridge, probing for details about the property's size, water sources, and even the security system. The friend had overheard one man claim, "We've just got to show that old lady she's better off selling." Gio, however, refused to be bullied. She quietly upgraded her perimeter alarms, reinforced her barn doors, and rechecked her emergency backup generator. She and Harriet met nightly to strategize, sometimes huddled over maps in Harriet's living room. They identified choke points, vantage spots, and likely approaches from the main roads. "Might as well treat this like a formal operation," Harriet quipped one evening. "They're using paramilitary tactics, so we'll respond accordingly." One particularly dark night, Toby, who was driving back from a feed run, phoned Gio in a panic. "I'm being followed," he gasped. "Black SUV, no plates." Gio immediately told him to keep driving toward Harriet's property, where she stood ready near the gate with a spotlight. As Toby barreled down the lane, headlights flashed behind him. Harriet flipped on the spotlight, washing the gravel in a bright white brilliance. The SUV skidded to a halt before reversing away, tires squealing as it fled into the darkness. Toby's voice shook when he finally parked. "They almost ran me off the road," he muttered. Gio, stone-faced, only said, "They're trying to scare you. Don't give them the satisfaction." Yet she patted his shoulder in unspoken appreciation for his bravery. That same week, the orchard's irrigation lines were cut again. This time, Blaze discovered the sabotage before it caused irreversible damage, his keen nose detecting the fresh scent of human intrusion. Gio repaired the lines promptly, and Harriet found footprints leading into a neighboring field, but they vanished near a heavily used highway. Convinced the saboteurs were professionals, Gio began sleeping in short shifts, always one ear tuned to the farm's electronic alarms. Frustration grew with each incident, yet so did the determination within the small alliance defending Falcon Ridge. The dogs sensed the tension and maintained near-permanent alertness. Scout, usually the most relaxed, took to pacing along the porch at night, occasionally letting out a quiet bark whenever he heard rustling in the distance. Halo became more protective of Toby, often following him around the farm as if guarding a younger pack member. Gio held firm in her stance, no sale, no capitulation. She also tried contacting a regional agricultural association, hoping to rally fellow farmers. Many sympathized, but few had the resources or will to fight a lengthy legal or physical battle. Most were either exhausted by repeated vandalism or enticed by Langford's buyout offers. Late one evening, Harriet told Gio, "We may be standing alone on this. We can't rely on the county or neighbors to handle the heavy lifting." Gio nodded grimly. "I'm prepared for that, but I won't let corporate bullies, armed or not, take what I've built." A significant turning point came when Harriet's longtime friend, a retired Army intelligence officer named Kurt Gallagher, visited. Kurt arrived in an unmarked sedan, dressed in casual clothes that belied his analytical background. Over several hours, he studied Gio's camera footage and Harriet's notes, then compiled a brief. His conclusion was unsettling. Langford's operation isn't just about forcing sales, he said. They seem to have a sophisticated chain of command, possibly connected to a private security firm known for strong-arm tactics. Kurt mentioned that some of these firms included ex-military personnel who were well-versed in intimidation, covert sabotage, and counter-surveillance. Geo leaned against her desk, arms folded. So they know exactly how to skirt the law without leaving undeniable evidence, she surmised. They break things, intimidate people, but rarely show up with direct threats on camera. Kurt nodded. Precisely. They push boundaries, but not enough to get immediate federal attention. The question is, do they escalate to open violence if you keep holding out? The question lingered like a storm cloud. Geo recalled operations overseas, where local militias would sabotage water sources or roads until the population caved in. The parallels were chilling. She let out a steady breath. We'll keep documenting everything. If they do escalate, we'll have proof for self-defense. But I'm hoping they realize they've picked a fight with the wrong farm. Over the next few days, Harriet and Kurt helped Geo develop a layered defense plan. The outer perimeter near the creek would have hidden motion sensors keyed to an alert in the farmhouse. Harriet positioned a trail camera in a hollowed tree trunk where vehicles might approach. Toby took on extra tasks, daytime deliveries, checking remote corners of the farm, and staying alert for suspicious vehicles. Meanwhile, the dogs underwent refresher drills. Geo practiced silent hand signals for low-light confrontations, ensuring that Blaze, Scout, and Halo would coordinate with minimal human cues. News of continuing trouble trickled in from around the county. Harriet heard from the local postmaster that an unusual number of property deeds were being processed. Langford, it seemed, was successful in bullying many smaller farms into selling. Rumors abounded that once enough parcels were consolidated, heavy construction would begin, likely some sprawling resort development. Toby also mentioned overhearing a barroom conversation claiming that Falcon Ridge is the last big holdout, and Langford's men will handle it soon enough. The entire situation felt like a slow siege. One late afternoon, as Geo finished placing new sensors near the orchard, Blaze stiffened, staring across the open field. Following his gaze, Geo spotted a pair of men on the distant boundary, standing by a dark SUV. She couldn't make out details, but the body language was unmistakably watchful. They stood there for several minutes, presumably noting camera positions or fence lines, before driving away. "Let 'em look," Geo muttered. "We have more than enough surprises if they try anything." In a brief lull, Harriet and Geo shared a pot of coffee on the back porch. The older woman rubbed her temples. "Feels like we're living in a war zone again," Harriet sighed. Geo nodded. "But the difference is, we're not alone, and we're better prepared than they'll ever guess." It was nearing midnight when the biggest assault yet took place. Geo was alone in her security room. Toby had already gone to bed and Harriet was stationed at her property line. The monitors showed a quiet expanse, the orchard and fields bathed in the eerie silver of moonlight. Blaze, Scout, and Halo were dozing in designated spots around the house, each ready to spring into action at the slightest cue. At exactly 12:14 a.m., alarms went off in a burst of red flashing lights and shrill beeps. Multiple sensors near the creek triggered, indicating at least 6 intruders crossing from different angles. Geo tensed, quickly switching camera feeds. Harriet's voice crackled over the radio. "I've got movement all over. They're coordinated." Indeed, the screen showed men in dark clothing, some carrying what looked like bolt cutters or crowbars. A few held firearms, though it was hard to identify models in the grainy night vision. Within 2 minutes, the intruders reached the orchard area. Geo pressed a button, activating low-level floodlights that popped on around the trees, casting disorienting shadows. She barked a command into the radio. "Toby, stay put. Harriet, I'm sending the dogs. Cover them if you can." Harriet's reply was crisp. "Understood. I'm moving into overwatch position near the barn." Geo whistled sharply, and Blaze, Scout, and Halo sprang up. She flung open the back door, letting them out into the darkness. Through the monitors, she watched the intruders stop in confusion, guns swinging in nervous arcs. One shouted, "Spread out! Watch for those damn dice!" That confirmed they knew about the Malinois from earlier encounters. They likely came prepared, but were they prepared enough? Gout broke left, circling wide around a cluster of intruders. Blaze darted forward in near silence, while Halo took a central route. The orchard lights created pockets of visibility that made the intruders easy to spot, yet the dogs themselves remained in the darker gaps, their coats blending seamlessly with the shadows. One intruder jerked his head around. "We can't see them," he yelled. Another responded, "Use the flashbang." A small canister arced through the air, landing with a muffled pop and a bright flash. For a second, the orchard flared white. Geo's cameras whited out, and her heart thudded. She feared for the mice, though she knew she'd trained them to handle sudden bursts of light and noise. When the feed normalized, the men were scattering. Two clutched their ears, disoriented. The others stumbled into a wide retreat, firing a few panicked shots in random directions. Harriet's calm voice cut through. "Shots fired near the barn. I see muzzle flashes, moving to flank." Overhead, a sensor beeped. Someone had tripped another perimeter alarm near the water pump. Geo's jaw tightened. They were hitting multiple targets at once, presumably to break her system. "Maintain defensive posture," she told Harriet. "Drive them out if we can." Meanwhile, Blaze sprang on a man who was fumbling with a crowbar. The dog knocked him flat, teeth bared an inch from the intruder's face. Before the man could even scream, Blaze pinned him, a menacing growl rumbling through the orchard. At the same time, Scout tackled another intruder, trying to place a small explosive device near an irrigation junction. The stunned saboteur lashed out with a boot, but the dog sidestepped deftly and latched onto his forearm in a controlled grip. Despite the man's wild flailing, Scout maintained the hold, well-trained not to let go without command. Halo cornered a third intruder, guiding him into a patch of thorny bushes, effectively trapping him. The orchard was alive with the sounds of snarling bombs, shouted curses, and frantic scuffling. Watching from her command station, Geo felt adrenaline surge through her. She glanced at a side screen showing Harriet's vantage point. Harriet had fired a warning shot into the air, forcing two men near the barn to drop their tools and run. Meanwhile, the orchard cameras showed that the men pinned by the waves were in full panic mode, calling for backup. A radio crackle indicated the group had a getaway vehicle waiting near the creek. "We're pulling out," someone shouted. Another voice yelled, "Not without Sam! He's down!" They had advanced technology, radios, flashbangs, possibly more, but their strategy lacked the precision of a well-honed team. It was more like a hired bunch of toughs who'd been given paramilitary toys. In contrast, Geo's dogs operated with seamless discipline. She took a final sip of lukewarm coffee, then grabbed her rifle and hurried outside to help finish the job. She reached the orchard to find Blaze guarding a trembling intruder on the ground who had dropped a half-assembled sabotage kit. Scout still held onto the man's arm near the irrigation line, while Halo confronted a third who was pressed against a fence post, too terrified to move. Overhead, a gibbous moon lit the scene in stark relief, revealing faces contorted with fear and confusion. Geo approached calmly, rifle angled down but ready. "You came here to wreck my property and intimidate me. How's that working out for you now?" None of the men answered, though two looked like they wanted to beg for mercy. Harriet arrived, breath somewhat ragged from sprinting, rifle at her side. "The others ran for the creek," she reported. "I heard an engine. They might have escaped." She pointed her weapon at the pinned man near Blaze. "Call off your dogs if you want them to live," the man mumbled, voice trembling. Geo gave a short, humorless laugh. "My dogs will step back when I tell them to. But first, you're going to drop any weapons you have and crawl away, slowly." She nodded at Harriet, who covered them. One by one, the intruders tossed out firearms, knives, or tools. Then, under Geo's watchful gaze, they eased backward until the dogs released them. "Get out," she said simply. "Let Langford know that if he sends more men, they'll be met with the same." The battered men limped off, occasionally casting terrified glances at Blaze, Scout, and Halo. A few rejoined with a waiting pickup near the creek, headlights snapping on as they sped off into the night. Harriet and Geo stood among the wreckage. Broken irrigation sections, footprints everywhere, the orchard's half-trampled grass shining with dew. Toby appeared in pajamas, wide-eyed but uninjured. The dogs panted heavily, but no serious harm had come to them aside from a few minor scrapes. Even in the tense quiet, Geo felt a grim satisfaction. They had repelled the most coordinated assault yet, but a corner of her mind wondered if this confrontation was merely a warm-up. Langford's people clearly had resources, and if they truly planned a major development, they might bring in even more formidable forces. She scratched behind Blaze's ears and muttered, "One more fight won, but we'd better be ready for whatever comes next." In the aftermath, Sheriff Morris arrived, shaking his head at the scorched patches left by a flashbang and the scattered sabotage tools. He took statements, photographed evidence, and promised to file a comprehensive report. "I'm sending this straight to the state investigators," he said. "Too many coincidences link these attacks to Langford's acquisitions." Nonetheless, he cautioned that legal action could be slow. "Without a direct confession or an ironclad chain of evidence, we might just chase paper." Langford can claim these were independent contractors. Following the sheriff's visit, Toby and Harriet assisted Geo in making repairs. The orchard's irrigation system needed new lines and junctions. Toby worked tirelessly to ensure the orchard wouldn't go without water. Harriet replaced a few cracked fence posts. Every so often, they'd see Harriet's friend Kurt drop by with additional intelligence he'd pieced together. "There's talk of private security consultants funneling equipment to Langford's men," he mentioned, scanning pages of notes. "Some advanced gear, though nothing too exotic. Enough to outgun an average civilian." Geo wasn't an average civilian. She carefully took stock of her resources. Blaze, Scout, and Halo were in prime condition, but she recognized that multiple consecutive nights of conflict would wear anyone down. Harriet, Toby, and Geo herself were all trained or experienced in some capacity, yet they lacked the backup that a large agency could provide. The dogs' morale and readiness were high, but they couldn't be expected to fight forever without rest. Within days, local gossip about the failed orchard attack spread through the community. Some neighbors quietly applauded Geo's stand. Others seemed fearful that her resistance might provoke even worse retaliation. Harriet heard from a mutual acquaintance that Langford's furious. He's supposedly flying in bigger guns. To confirm, Toby took a drive past Langford's main office located in a small neighboring city. He saw tinted SUVs in the parking lot, each bearing out-of-state plates. "They looked like they were from some corporate security firm," he told Geo. Despite the mounting tension, Geo refused to yield. She made sure Toby understood the danger. "If it gets too rough, I'll pay you for a month's work in advance," she offered, giving him an out. "You can leave. No questions asked." Toby shook his head emphatically. "Falcon Ridge is as much my home as anywhere else. I won't run." Harriet, for her part, doubled down, even moving a small camper onto a section of her property that adjoined Geo's land so she could respond more quickly at night. That solidarity heartened Geo, but the notion of bigger guns weighed on her mind. She knew well that ex-Special Forces mercenaries could be hired if a developer had enough money. In places overseas, she'd seen them handle security for major corporations, adept at intimidation and sabotage that towed the line of legality. Falcon Ridge Farm might be a testbed for these tactics in a domestic setting. Yet, if so, they were messing with the wrong woman. 25 years of Marine K-9 experience had taught her how to adapt to nearly any enemy's game plan. As night fell again, she performed a final round of checks on the newly fortified orchard lines, the barn, and the hidden cameras. Blaze, Scout, and Halo shadowed her steps, each one alert. She murmured to them, "You're the best team I've ever worked with. Let's show these people we're not an easy target." The sun slipped behind the mountains, and the farm fell under a dome of starlight. Another night, another vigil. But for Geo Walters, this was just another mission, protecting home turf from an aggressor, same as she'd done countless times in distant lands. Around this time, Kurt returned with the unsettling information. Some of Langford's new security hires had backgrounds in advanced tactical units. One name in particular, Nolan Brax, raised red flags. "Brax used to run with a private military group overseas," Kurt explained. "Records hint he's an expert in counter K-9 operations. If Langford hired him, you can expect specialized tactics, things like sonic deterrence, advanced sedation, or infiltration methods specifically designed to disable guard dogs." Geo felt a chill. She'd encountered a few such specialists in her career. The technology existed to disorient or incapacitate even the best trained dogs, especially if the handlers weren't anticipating it. Harriet's expression hardened. "Then we'd better prepare. We can't rely solely on standard methods. Indeed, they set about planning new contingencies, fallback positions if certain vantage points were compromised, alternative signals for the dogs that didn't rely on audible commands, and deeper layers of mechanical security that wouldn't fail if electronics got jammed. Sure enough, suspicious vehicles started appearing again at odd hours. Harriet spotted a van parked along the main road, its driver seemingly photographing the area. Toby was trailed by a black SUV for several miles, but managed to slip away by taking a back road. Meanwhile, Harriet's motion-triggered cameras near the boundary caught glimpses of men scoping out vantage points. Once, they even found a small drone near the creek, presumably launched to map the farm's layout. Days later, the confrontation Harriet and Geo expected finally came. It started just after dusk, with all the telltale signs of advanced tactics: multiple sensor disruptions at once, sporadic interference on radio frequencies, and carefully placed decoys that triggered alarms far from the true points of entry. While Geo rushed to investigate a tripped alarm by the barn, a real team attempted to breach the farmhouse from the south side. Harriet's radio hissed with static, partially jammed. She caught fragments of Toby's voice saying something about men in full tactical gear. Blaze alerted to the infiltration near the house. Through night vision goggles, Geo could see half a dozen figures. They moved with professional coordination, wearing gear that looked heavier than what she'd seen on previous groups. For the first time, she felt genuine concern for the dogs. If these were ex-special forces with counter-canine gadgets, it could be far more dangerous than a typical scuffle. Yet she steadied herself, heart pounding. Halo, with me. Blaze, wide flank. Scout, hold near Toby. She repeated the signals by hand, ensuring the dogs understood despite the radio interference. Moments later, sharp pulses of sound emanated from a device the intruders carried. Blaze recoiled momentarily, clearly pained by the high-frequency noise. Halo whined, ears pinning flat. Geo swore under her breath. They were using ultrasonic suppressors, tools specifically designed to confuse or incapacitate a dog's heightened hearing. She quickly switched to a backup plan, ushering the dogs behind a barn wall to recover. Harriet arrived on scene, rifle in hand, yelling, "We have to disrupt that device." But to do so, they'd have to confront the intruders head-on. Halo shook off the disorientation first, though the high-pitched whine remained audible to canine ears. The men advanced in a close formation, evidently confident their specialized gear gave them an insurmountable edge. One hissed commands, "Stay tight, watch for flank attacks." Geo recognized the voice of a seasoned operator, calm under pressure. This was not a ragtag sabotage crew. They were trained for precisely this environment. Despite the risk, Geo rolled a small flashbang canister toward them, hoping to rattle their formation. It detonated with a resounding crack and blinding flash. The lead intruder staggered, cursing. The ultrasonic device wavered, diminishing in effect. Realizing the window of opportunity, Geo whistled a command, and Blaze sprang around the far corner, launching a swift strike. Before the men could recover, Harriet fired carefully aimed rounds into the ground near their feet. Warning shots, but enough to make them scramble. Amid the confusion, Scout and Halo closed in from opposite sides. The men fired their weapons in short bursts. Bullets pinged off metal and dirt, but fortunately none struck the dogs. Harriet took cover behind a tractor, firing sporadically to keep them pinned. In that chaotic half-light of muzzle flashes, Geo glimpsed the men's advanced gear: ballistic vests, communication headsets, and sidearms with suppressors. They shouted for retreat. "Pull back! It's not worth it!" The phrase told Geo these intruders might have instructions to avoid unnecessary casualties or publicity. That was her advantage. She could defend aggressively if needed. Slowly but surely, Harriet, Geo, and the dogs forced the men to yield ground. One intruder tossed a final device, a small cylinder that hissed out a cloud of gas. "Mask up!" Harriet yelled, yanking a bandana over her face. Geo did the same. The gas stung her eyes, but it wasn't lethal, likely just tear gas. The beads, though affected, had partial filtration muzzles. In experimental gear Geo had trained them to wear in anticipation of chemical deterrence. They coughed and blinked but remained functional. The men retreated in good order, a show of training even under duress. Geo saw one man, presumably Nolan Brax, glance backward. He wore a half mask that concealed much of his face, but his eyes radiated frustrated rage. Then he melted into the shadows, vanishing with the rest of the team. Vehicles roared to life in the distance, headlights weaving through the blackness. Harriet stepped up beside Gio, breathing heavily. "That was serious hardware," she muttered, voice muffled by her makeshift mask. "Too serious for a simple land dispute." Gio nodded, adrenaline still coursing. "We handled it, though. They threw everything at us, sonic attacks, gas firearms, but we're still standing." Indeed, Blaze, Scout, and Halo regrouped, each dog panting, yet alert, as if ready for the next wave. The yard smelled of spent gunpowder and the faint tang of tear gas. Toby emerged from behind the barn, eyes red from the tear gas, but otherwise unharmed. "Are we clear?" he asked, voice shaking. Gio nodded. "For now." For the first time, she allowed herself to consider a deeper question. Why go to such extremes for farmland? Was Langford's project merely a resort, or was there something bigger behind it, something that justified employing ex-military operatives? She had no solid answers yet. But if Brax and his crew represented the next echelon of intimidation, she'd proven that technology alone couldn't topple the foundation of skill, planning, and the unwavering bond between handler and dog. The following days brought a whirlwind of fallout and revelations. Sheriff Morris arrived with 2 state investigators in tow. They documented bullet casings, fragments of specialized devices left behind, and even the remains of that ultrasonic emitter. Harriet guided them through the orchard, the barn, and the spots where the gas had been dispersed. Gio handed over her digital footage, which clearly showed armed men with advanced gear attempting an organized infiltration. The state investigators traded grim looks. "This is beyond a local property dispute," one said flatly. "We'll be forwarding this to federal authorities." Sure enough, the involvement of out-of-state licenses, advanced weaponry, and specialized tactics hinted at a broader network. Rumors spread quickly. Local newspapers latched onto the story of the farmers under siege, fueling speculation about Langford's real motives. Some guessed it was tied to acquiring prime water rights for a massive industrial project. Others speculated about clandestine training facilities. Kurt pitched his own theory. They might be building more than a resort, maybe a paramilitary base masked as a commercial operation. No one knew for sure, but the upshot was that the brazen aggression had exposed them to official scrutiny. Meanwhile, Toby and Harriet devoted time to fortifying the farm for good measure, though a sense of relief had started to settle in. If the federal agencies got involved, Langford's men wouldn't be able to continue their campaign so openly. Indeed, within a week, Harriet heard from a contact at the sheriff's office. Langford himself is lawyering up big time. Investors are pulling out. The tide was turning. On a practical level, Gio still had to repair sections of fencing, patch bullet holes in the barn walls, and replace some damaged orchard irrigation. But those tasks felt like minor inconveniences compared to what might have happened if the Bays and the defenders hadn't been so prepared. One brisk morning, as the sun rose over Falcon Ridge, Harriet joined Gio on the porch, sipping coffee in the cool air. The farmland glistened, showing few signs of the violent nights that had tested them. Blaze, Scout, and Halo lounged in the yard, tails thumping lazily. "You think they'll try again?" Harriet asked, her tone serious but hopeful. Gio inhaled, letting the fresh air fill her lungs. "Doubtful they'll try another direct assault. The feds are nosing around now, and these guys don't want national headlines. Still, we won't drop our guard." True to her word, she kept the cameras rolling, the alarms armed, and the dogs on the same rigorous training schedule. Toby assisted by running daily checks and organizing supplies, ensuring they could withstand any future disruption. The entire ordeal had been a gauntlet, a series of escalations that tested their resolve. But in the end, the advanced technology, outside funding, and well-trained enforcers had failed to break the spirit of a woman who had spent a career learning how to outmaneuver bigger threats. A week later, the news officially broke. Multiple arrests were made in connection to illegal enforcement actions orchestrated by unscrupulous developers. Some men turned state's evidence, implicating not just Langford, but also the private security firm that employed Brax. Federal subpoenas flew across multiple states, and it became clear that Falcon Ridge Farm was one piece of a larger puzzle of corrupt land grabbing. Geo, Harriet, Toby, and the three Malinois were hailed by some neighbors as local heroes, reluctant symbols of standing one's ground. Yet to Geo, the real triumph was simply waking each morning on her beloved farm, listening to the contented snuffles of the dogs, and knowing she'd kept her home safe. From my perspective, this story is a testament to the resilience and determination of those who refuse to be bullied off their land. Watching Geo and her dogs outmaneuver a ruthless developer's hired guns reminded me that no amount of money or technology can replace genuine heart and unbreakable bonds. In the end, every attempt to terrorize Falcon Ridge Farm only made its defenders stronger, forging deeper trust and unity among them. Their victory extends beyond just a single farm. This triumph sends a message that unity, preparedness, and community spirit can stand firm against greed and intimidation. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this final outcome. Did the story's resolution surprise you? Please share your insights in the comments so we can keep the conversation going. And remember, if you want more tales that celebrate courage, loyalty, and the power of standing strong, subscribe to Farmer's Story. We'd be honored to have you along for many more adventures ahead.